The diner was packed, clinking silverware and coffee refills echoing across the checkered floor. Emily stepped out from behind the counter, order pad in one hand, a nervous smile painted across her face. She took a deep breath. Her sneakers squeaked slightly as she approached the group of 4 men at the corner table, well-dressed, loud, already halfway through their jokes. Goo, good morning, Jin, gentlemen, she stammered softly. The first man raised an eyebrow. The second one smirked. Then came the chuckle, followed by a full-blown laugh. One of them whispered something, and the whole table erupted. Is she trying to sing or serve? One of them joked loudly enough for the neighboring booths to hear. A waitress behind the counter shook her head with a quiet sigh. A few customers looked up. Most looked away. The manager? He stayed in the back, as if he had seen this before and would rather pretend it was not happening again. Emily's face flushed. She lowered her eyes. Her hand trembled slightly as she held the pen over her notepad. Then, someone else looked up. A man. Older, calm, sitting alone in a booth by the window. He had been watching the entire exchange without saying a word. No laughter. No disgust. Just a soft, steady gaze, almost too quiet for the noise in the room. He watched her. All morning. When his meal was done, he stood, left a generous tip, and walked out without a word. Emily thought it was over, until she returned to his table and found a small folded napkin that would change her life forever. Her name was Emily Jameson. She was 26, and most people who met her remembered only 2 things, her soft brown eyes, and the way her voice broke when she tried to speak. But what they never noticed was the fire behind those eyes, the quiet fight she carried with her every day. Emily had worked at Maggie's Diner for nearly 3 years, ever since her mother fell sick and she had to drop out of college. She had dreamed of studying literature, maybe even becoming a teacher. But that dream began slipping away the day her mother's hospital bills started piling up. The stutter? That came much earlier. She was only 7 when it began, after watching her father collapse from a sudden heart attack right in front of her. The trauma wrapped itself around her throat like an invisible hand, squeezing whenever she tried to speak under pressure. Doctors called it trauma-induced stuttering. Classmates called it something else broken. Still, Emily never allowed her stutter to keep her silent. She practiced in front of the mirror every morning, whispering full sentences to herself as if preparing for a speech no one else would ever hear. She read poetry aloud when she was alone. She tried to be cheerful at work, even when her voice cracked in front of customers. And when people mocked her, she swallowed the pain, tucked it behind a smile, and kept going. The town she lived in was small. The kind where people remembered you by your flaws. In Emily's case, the flaw had become her name. Oh, the stuttering girl? Yeah, she works at Maggie's. But she never let bitterness bloom. Every morning, she arrived early, swept the floor, stocked the napkin holders, and reminded herself, just be kind. Just keep going. Emily was the type of person who left extra sugar packets at tables for the elderly, who smiled at every crying child even if she struggled to ask them what was wrong. And yet, for all that kindness, the world never seemed to offer her much more than awkward glances and cold laughter. She was not weak. She was just tired of being humiliated for something she never chose. And on that one particular day, the day the businessmen mocked her without mercy, her heart nearly broke for the last time. But fate, it seems, had been quietly watching, sitting in that corner booth, listening, preparing, and it was about to show her just how loud a whisper could become. The lunch rush hit hard that Friday. The sun outside was blazing, and inside, the AC fought to keep up as the diner's booths filled with chatter, sizzling grills, and clinking plates. Emily moved quickly from table to table, trying to keep her rhythm. Step, smile, greet, write, repeat. But she had not seen them come in. 4 men in crisp suits sat down in the back, loud enough to turn heads. Out-of-towners, probably salesmen, with flashy watches and booming voices that filled the small space like smoke. Emily's coworker Alyssa nudged her. That one booth is yours, she said, with a half-smirk. Good luck. Emily approached the table slowly, her breath catching as it always did in moments like this. She had done her warm-up exercises that morning. She had told herself, you are calm. You are safe. You can do this. But now, standing before them, her throat betrayed her. Good afternoon, gentle. Laughter exploded before she could finish. One of the men leaned toward her, elbows on the table, his smirk dripping with cruelty. Come again? I did not quite catch that. "You buffering, sweetheart," he said, mimicking a spinning wheel with his finger. Another slapped the table, howling. "Oh, man. Did we get Alexa or a broken fax machine today?" The third one cupped his ear dramatically. "Say that again? Slower this time. Maybe spell it out." The whole table roared. Emily's pen slipped from her hand. Customers turned. Some stared in silence. Others looked away, pretending not to notice. No one said a word. The kitchen door cracked open. The manager peeked through, then quickly disappeared inside again. And Emily? She stood frozen. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew even if she tried, they would not let her finish. Her face flushed crimson. Her fingers clenched around the order pad. Her lips trembled with humiliation. It was not the first time, but somehow this felt worse. Behind the counter, Alyssa whispered something to the other waiter. A chuckle followed. Emily stepped back from the table. I will be back in a minute, she managed to say, though her words trembled like a tightrope walker in the wind. She turned away, blinking fast, holding her tears hostage behind her eyes. At that moment, everything inside her wanted to collapse, to walk into the kitchen, untie her apron, and disappear. But unknown to her, someone else had been watching it all unfold. Someone who had not laughed. Someone who was quietly preparing to turn this moment of public shame into something far greater than she could imagine. Emily pushed through the kitchen doors, her head low, her breath tight. Inside, the clatter of dishes and orders being shouted across the room seemed far away, muffled under the weight pressing on her chest. She leaned against the sink, gripped the cold steel counter with trembling hands, and stared down at the floor. She was not crying. Not yet. But her voice had cracked in front of the entire diner again, and this time, it had drawn laughter, not sympathy. Again, the head chef, George, a burly man with kind eyes, glanced over. "You okay, Em?" he asked softly. She nodded without looking up. "I'll take that as a no," he murmured. Emily shook her head. Just give me a minute." He nodded and turned away, giving her space. In that small moment of silence, something flickered in her chest. Shame, yes, but beneath it, an ember of anger. Why did people think it was acceptable to humiliate others like that? Why was mocking someone's struggle still treated as entertainment? She drew a long breath, wiped her palms against her apron, and walked back out. The group of men were still laughing over their meals, tossing sarcastic comments about the performance. They barely noticed her as she passed by, just a background character in their lunchtime comedy. But not everyone was laughing. In the far left booth, near the window, a man sat alone. He was older, late 50s, maybe early 60s, gray at the temples, dressed in simple khakis and a navy button-down shirt. He had a leather notebook open in front of him and a cup of black coffee growing cold. He had been there the entire time, and he had watched everything. Emily noticed his gaze as she walked past, steady, calm, unblinking. There was no pity in his eyes, no judgment, just attention. She gave a faint smile and nodded as she passed. He nodded back. A moment of quiet recognition. She returned to her duties, trying to hold her composure. But she could feel his eyes following her, not in a creepy or intrusive way. In a way that said, "I saw what happened, and I am still here." Over the next hour, the lunch rush slowed. The noisy table eventually paid and left, still chuckling as they walked out. No apology, no acknowledgement. But the man by the window remained. He finished his meal slowly, scribbled something in his notebook, looked out the window, occasionally glanced back at Emily as she cleared tables and filled ketchup bottles. He never asked for a refill, never called her over. And yet, when he finally stood and left, there was something different about the way he moved, deliberate, thoughtful, as though he was leaving more behind than just an empty plate. When Emily approached his booth a few minutes later, she found the tip generous, but not flashy, and next to it, carefully folded and placed under the edge of his plate. A napkin, one that would change everything. Emily hesitated before picking up the napkin. It was not unusual for people to leave handwritten notes, complaints about the food, comments about the service, even the occasional phone number scrawled in chicken scratch. But this one was different. The napkin was folded with care, crisp and clean, untouched by the greasy plate beside it. On top of it sat $100 bill. Far more than what anyone ever tipped for a breakfast special and black coffee. She glanced around the diner. The man was gone. No name, no goodbye. Just this message. She unfolded it slowly, her hands still trembling slightly from the earlier encounter. Written in smooth, elegant handwriting, it read, "You have a beautiful voice. Do not ever let them silence it." She froze. For a moment, her surroundings vanished. The clinking of forks, the hum of the ceiling fan, the buzzing of the open kitchen, all of it faded into silence. She read it again. Not brave effort, not keep trying, not sorry for what happened. No, he called her voice beautiful. Not despite her stutter. Not in pity, but as it was. It was the first time anyone had ever said that. She sat down in the booth, stunned. The note felt heavier than it should, like it carried something more than just words, like someone had seen straight through the noise and right into her soul. She turned the napkin over, half expecting nothing. But there it was, a name, a signature. Richard DeWitt. Her eyes widened. She knew that name. Everyone did. Richard DeWitt was not just some friendly stranger. He was a nationally renowned author, motivational speaker, and former voice therapist who had helped celebrities and politicians overcome speech challenges. His TED Talk, Finding Power in the Pause, had millions of views. Emily had watched it a dozen times back in college, back when she still believed she could be more than just a waitress with a stutter. Her heart began to race. What was he doing here? Why had he come to Maggie's? Why her? She clutched the napkin to her chest, disbelief and wonder flooding her at once. In a single moment, the humiliation of the day, the laughter, the mockery, all of it shrank in the shadow of a handwritten note and a stranger's kindness. It felt impossible. And yet, somehow, it felt like it was meant to happen all along. What she did not know, what she could not know, was that Richard DeWitt had seen something in her far beyond that stutter. And he was not done with her yet. Not even close. That night, long after the diner had closed and the last table had been wiped down, Emily sat alone in the corner booth where he had been. The napkin was still in her hands, folded and unfolded so many times it had begun to soften at the edges. The diner was quiet now. Just the low hum of the fridge in the kitchen and the tick of the old clock above the register. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows through the glass, catching the glint of her tear-streaked cheeks. George, the head chef, walked over with 2 mugs of tea and sat across from her without a word. He had worked there longer than anyone. He had seen her laugh. He had seen her break. He had never asked why she stayed. Tonight, he did. "Why do you put yourself through this, Em?" he asked gently. "You could have walked out a long time ago." Emily took a slow sip of tea, then stared at the cup for a long moment before answering. "When I was a little girl," she said, her voice low but steady, "I used to stand in front of the mirror and pretend I was giving speeches. Real speeches. To crowds. I wanted to teach. To write books. Maybe even stand on a stage one day." George leaned back, eyebrows slightly raised. "But then," she continued, "my dad died. Right in front of me. We were laughing about something, and then he just collapsed. And I could not even scream. I just stood there, choking on my own voice." She paused. That was the day it started. The stutter. The silence between them filled with meaning. "I kept trying. I joined speech therapy in school, practiced for hours. But every time I spoke in front of people, the fear would crawl back up my throat. My teachers said I was smart, but that I would never be presentable." Her eyes welled again, but she did not look away. "So, I stopped speaking up. I stopped dreaming about those crowds. I found this job, started paying bills, and made peace with the fact that my voice just was not meant for more." She opened the napkin again. "But today, someone told me I have a beautiful voice." She looked up, eyes wide and full. Not a brave voice, not a survivor's voice, a beautiful one. George leaned forward, his voice hoarse. "You know who that was, right?" She nodded. "I used to watch his speeches back in college," she whispered. "He once said, 'The most powerful voices are not always the loudest, they are the most honest.' I wrote that quote on the first page of my journal." She paused. Now, he has written something back. For the first time in years, she felt something rise in her, not just hope, but permission. Permission to believe that maybe, just maybe, her story was not over. And it would not end here. By Monday morning, Emily's story was no longer just her own. It started with a single social media post. A high school teacher named Mrs. Keller had been visiting the diner that same day. She had witnessed the scene, the laughter, the mockery, the napkin. She had taken a picture of the napkin, with the name discreetly blurred, and posted it online with a caption that read, "Kindness is powerful." This world-famous author saw what we all ignored. He reminded a young woman that her voice matters. Let us all be more like him. By the time Emily opened the diner that morning, the post had been shared over 40,000 times. By noon, it was trending nationwide. The name Richard DeWitt appeared in articles on Yahoo News, The Atlantic, and even on daytime TV. But what no one had expected was what Richard did next. He posted publicly on his verified page, "I met a waitress this weekend. She stutters." The world laughed. "She served anyway. I left a note, but I have more to say. If you were reading this, Emily, I meant what I wrote, and I want to help you use that voice. Let us begin a new chapter." The post ended with a public email, "Speak with courage at." Emily's phone began ringing nonstop. Her inbox overflowed. Journalists reached out. Local news vans parked across the street. She stared at her phone in disbelief. Her hands were shaking, but not with fear. With something else. Possibility. Her manager, red-faced and clearly panicked, pulled her into the office and tried to act warm. "Emily, we support you. We always have. You know, the customer is not always right. You have really brought attention to the diner." She smiled politely. "I think I brought attention to something else." He nodded quickly, sensing he was no longer in control. By that afternoon, strangers began showing up, not for pancakes, but for Emily. Mothers came with children who stuttered. A veteran with a speech disability shook her hand, tears in his eyes. A little girl, no older than 9, handed her a drawing of a superhero waitress with a big red heart and a golden name tag that read, "Voice of Steel." For the first time in her life, Emily felt the world not just listening, but cheering for her voice. Later that evening, she opened her email, and there it was. A message from Richard DeWitt himself. Subject line, "Let us begin. Emily, your strength moved me. If you are ready to take this journey, I will be honored to coach you, personally. You are not broken. You are becoming." She stared at the screen, her eyes blurring. No one had ever said it like that before. Not broken. Becoming. And in that moment, Emily knew. The world that had mocked her had no idea what it had just unleashed. 2 days later, the diner phone rang again, but this time, it was not media. It was a corporate office in Chicago. A man from Westlake Financial Consulting was calling to speak with the owner. The 4 businessmen from Friday's lunch rush were employees of that very firm, and they were now the subject of a PR nightmare. One of them, unaware of the napkin notes' viral rise, had posted a joke on his personal account the night before. Waitress could not finish a sentence. "I almost tipped in Braille." It had gone unnoticed until someone connected the dots. His post was now being shared, and not in celebration. Within hours, thousands of people had commented beneath it, calling it disgusting, ableist, inhumane. Westlake issued an immediate apology and placed all 4 men on leave pending investigation. Their faces, names, and LinkedIn profiles were now circulating online, not as professionals, but as bullies. Meanwhile, the diner buzzed like a beehive. The same manager who had hidden in the back during the humiliation now scrambled to hang a support speech empowerment banner near the window. He printed Emily's story on flyers and handed them to every new customer, claiming the diner had always been a place for inclusive values. But Emily did not need validation from him. She stood taller now. She no longer avoided eye contact when customers walked in. Her stutter was still there, but she had stopped apologizing for it. And something about that confidence made even the most impatient guest slow down and listen. On Thursday morning, a package arrived for her at the diner. Inside was a leather-bound book titled, "The Pause is Powerful: How to Speak from the Heart," by Richard DeWitt. A sticky note was attached. "This is where we begin. You already know the ending. Now let us find your beginning." The customers who had once stared awkwardly at her now came to shake her hand, to thank her for being brave. But not everyone came forward. The businessmen never returned. Word was, 2 of them had been terminated. And as poetic as it might have been for Emily to gloat or demand an apology, she never did. She simply kept doing what she had always done, showing up, smiling, and speaking in her own time. And now, when her voice stumbled, no one laughed. They waited, because now they understood what it meant. It meant, strength is not always smooth. Sometimes, it stutters, but it keeps speaking anyway. By the weekend, Emily was no longer just a waitress from Missouri. She had become a symbol. Her story was now featured on the evening news, local and national. The segment opened with the viral napkin, zooming in on the words, "You have a beautiful voice." Then it showed her quietly working at the diner, smiling modestly, still in the same worn apron, but but now surrounded by support instead of scorn. Within hours, hashtags began to trend. Hashtag speak with courage, hashtag Emily voice of steel, hashtag pause power. People from across the country, veterans, students, teachers, even celebrities, posted videos stuttering through their own names or favorite quotes in solidarity. They tagged Emily. They thanked her. Some cried. One clip showed a little boy with a cleft palate reading a poem for the first time in public. Another showed a teenage girl saying, "Emily made me believe I am more than the way I speak." The local news anchor who interviewed her choked up on live TV, saying, "In a world full of noise, Emily taught us to listen." And then came the moment no one expected. The Ellen Show called. They wanted her on the next episode. A pre-recorded tribute showed Emily's viral moment and the message Richard DeWitt had posted. Sitting in the audience with shaking hands and teary eyes, Emily listened as Ellen introduced her. She did not shout. She did not fight back. She just stood there and kept speaking. And now, the whole world is listening. When the applause died down, Richard DeWitt walked onto the stage to surprise her. The crowd stood up before he could even speak. He hugged Emily gently and looked directly at her, saying just one sentence, "I told you your voice was beautiful. Now, everyone else knows too." Ellen presented her with a scholarship funded by DeWitt's foundation to attend any communication or public speaking program she chose, fully paid. The audience roared. Back in her hometown, the diner could not keep up with the flood of customers, tourists, and letters pouring in from every state. The mayor declared a local holiday, Speak with Courage Day. But through it all, Emily stayed grounded. She still clocked in, still helped clean tables, still said good morning even if it took her a few extra seconds. Because now, every pause in her voice meant something sacred. It meant 1,000 people were learning to love themselves again. Because she dared to be heard. And never again would she be silenced. 3 months later, the bell above the diner's door rang softly as Emily walked in, this time not in her uniform, but in a crisp white blouse and soft beige slacks. The regulars turned to greet her, their smiles wide, their eyes bright. She smiled back, clutching a neatly sealed envelope in one hand. The manager approached her with awkward enthusiasm. "Back for a visit?" he asked. She nodded gently. "For a bit," she said. Her stutter was still there, but now it no longer shook her voice. It shaped it. Behind her walked a young woman, maybe 18, nervous and fidgeting. Emily introduced her. "This is Kelsey, the new intern for the speaking group. She has a voice worth hearing." Kelsey smiled shyly, her eyes full of the same uncertainty Emily once carried. They were headed to the Emily Jameson Speech Empowerment Center, a community-supported, donation-powered initiative that Emily had launched just a week ago. It provided free training, coaching, and emotional support for young adults who struggled with speech anxiety, stuttering, or communication-related trauma. The first check that funded it? Richard DeWitt's personal donation, followed by contributions from thousands of people around the country. Emily walked to the back booth, the same one where she had first found the note. She ran her fingers across the wood and placed the envelope on the table. Inside it was her resignation letter. She had stayed long enough, not out of fear, but out of closure. Her chapter at the diner was ending, but her voice was just beginning to echo in places she once only dreamed of. Days later, Emily stood in front of a modest crowd at the community center's grand opening. Her hands trembled slightly as she stepped up to the microphone. Cameras clicked. Local officials sat up straight. A group of teenagers from her program beamed with pride in the front row. She glanced at Richard DeWitt, who gave her a simple nod. She took a deep breath. Her speech was not perfect. It paused. It caught. It stuttered. But no one interrupted. No one mocked. They listened. Because now, Emily was not speaking for herself alone. She was speaking for the 7-year-old girl who was too scared to say goodbye to her father. She was speaking for every student told to sit down because they talk funny. She was speaking for every customer service worker who had to smile through shame. And for every person who ever thought they were broken, just because their voice did not come out smooth. By the end of her speech, the audience was standing, many in tears. And Emily? She smiled, not out of relief, but from the realization that she had become exactly what she always wanted to be, heard. A year had passed. Spring had returned to the little Missouri town with cherry blossoms blooming along the sidewalks and a soft breeze rustling the diner's faded awning. But something inside the town had changed, something quieter than headlines, but stronger than gossip. Emily stood backstage at the local civic auditorium, gently adjusting the microphone pin to her collar. Her fingers trembled, not with fear, but with reverence. Tonight was not just another speaking event. It was the annual graduation ceremony for her first full class at the Speak with Courage Center. Each of her 10 students had battled stutters, confidence issues, stage fright, and shame. And each one had delivered a 3-minute personal story in front of a live audience. Now it was her turn. As she stepped onto the stage, the lights hit her face, and the applause filled her ears. But she only heard one thing: her own heartbeat. She took her position at the podium, looked down at her hands, then out at the crowd. Dozens of faces, many tearful, some smiling. And in the front row sat a little girl holding a sign. "We love your voice, Miss Emily." Her throat tightened, not from fear, from meaning. She began her speech, slowly, honestly, and yes, still with pauses. I used to believe, she said, her eyes scanning the crowd, that my voice was a burden. That every pause, made me small. She paused. Deep breath. But I learned that a voice is not about how fast it moves, but how true it sounds. The crowd was silent, not because they were uninterested, but because every single word mattered. When the world tells you that you are too much, or not enough, or too broken to be heard, she said, placing her hand over her heart, you look them in the eye, and you speak, even if it takes you 3 tries. She smiled gently. Because every voice matters. There were no cheers. Not at first. Just silence. Then a single clap. Then another. Until the whole room stood, not applauding her perfection, but her presence. Tears slipped from Emily's eyes, but she did not look away. She let them fall. Because for the first time in her life, she did not feel like she had survived the world. She felt like she was rebuilding it, one voice at a time. Some stories scream, others whisper, but the ones that stay with us are the ones that teach us how to listen. Emily's journey was never about finding the perfect words. It was about honoring the imperfect ones, the ones that came through tears, through shame, through trembling hands and stammered syllables. It was never about speaking without pause. It was about speaking despite the pause. Because sometimes the world moves so fast that it forgets the quiet voices, the hesitant voices, the ones that were told they were broken before they ever began. But not anymore. Emily's voice, once mocked, once dismissed, became a beacon, not because it was flawless, but because it was fearless. So if you are watching this today, wondering if your voice matters, it does. Whether you stutter, shake, whisper, or roar, your voice is not a weakness. It is your fingerprint, your soul and sound. And someone, somewhere, is waiting to hear exactly what only you can say. So do not wait for permission. Do not chase perfection. Just speak. Because the moment you do, you may find that the thing you once hid is exactly what the world needs most. If this story touched your heart, take one small step today, share it. Comment below with the words, "My voice matters." Subscribe for more real stories that prove courage lives in the quietest places.